Welcome to another Gran Turismo 7 tutorial. Today we're featuring the weekly race C. Toyota AE86s are in Tsukuba. And like always, I have controller on automatic transmission. But this one's a bit different than usual because Tsukuba ain't exactly the dandiest with a controller. And this car especially ain't the dandiest with automatic transmission. But I've been able to work with it enough to get, as of recording this on around 11:15 a.m. Eastern on Friday, top 25 in the world. So I figured it's worth a tutorial because, frankly, while Tsukuba is one of my better tracks, it's not like top 25. That's like where Tokyo Expressway Central Loop at my very best ish is. So, I have confidence in this tune, and that's why I'm showing the tune first. My driving, especially with this event at ABS being off, okay, I guess. But I do genuinely have confidence in this tune. Maybe this tune does truly really work better with a controller than it would with a wheel. I can't say because I don't have a wheel. But you can take my driving as you may, but I do recommend at least trying this tune. I'm going to guarantee it works, but at least for me, it's about 0.2 of a second faster than trying a bunch of the leader's tunes or variations of them and stuff. So, to analyze the tune to begin with, a lot of the stuff I always pretty much do. If it's allowed, usually speaking, I'll have the lowest front ride height possible and the highest rear. How that works is essentially lowest front ride height is just lower center of gravity, and that's kind of true of most racing games. For the rear, with Gran Turismo, it usually works as for cars that don't get the dangerous tracks in, having the rear end up means the tires have more room to like get tracks in and stuff, so that makes it to where it gets a better acceleration off the line. For the spring rate and anti-roll bars and things like that, essentially it's just makes it as stable as possible. All those are max. Also, the natural frequency max. No one else that I know of, at least competitively, is running it this way, but at least for me on a controller, it's what's best. My theory with this is why it works better for me is because just the controller ain't exactly as precise, and having it as stiff as possible means just less little movements and stuff. Little movements and stuff people on a steering wheel can probably deal with, not as much on a controller, so maybe that is a big difference there between a controller and wheel. But again, not to brag too much, but I would at least recommend testing this tune because it might be worthwhile. And no one's really running tow. I tested a little bit. It just doesn't really seem to be faster with this. GT7 in general, tow doesn't matter as much. That's just a thing that sort of started in Sport and definitely more in 7. For the differential, usually I will run an ISO torque and braking 5.5, and a lot of people seem to do that. That just makes it as easy to control as possible with those, and with this rear-wheel drive car, that's the way to go about it. Usually even a car that's extremely easy to control is that way too. Same difference, but for the acceleration, most people are running it higher than me, between like 50 and 60. 60 is the max. And a bit also my gear ratios, where I'm using automatic transmission, I have the gears kind of set more aggressively, meaning the leaders are using up to 4th gear, I'm using through 5th gear. My theory on what the leaders are doing is because this is a rear-wheel drive car, it doesn't necessarily need to have as short of gears, so only using 4 gears makes for less wheel spin, and when there is less wheel spin, that allows for there to be more wiggle room with the acceleration sensitivity. But where I'm using automatic transmission, no setup that I've been able to figure out will allow first gear to be used while still also using at least fourth gear and especially not fifth gear. I tried manual, and between my controller having stick drift and just I don't have a whole heck of a practice with manual in general, I just simply ain't faster with that. It's incredibly inconsistent with the stick drift that I have, and even on the field apps it does go well, it still seems to be a bit slower for me. In particular, so again, that's my theory with the differential. And then this is just going through the individual things, but since I talked about it, that's not necessarily as needed. I didn't know if I was going to do an outright tutorial for this or if I was just going to upload the video. I might as well do a tutorial because frankly I got a better time than I figured. For the downforce, it's max. This is quite a bit different than what the leaders are running too. The leaders are running around about 200 front downforce, 200 rear downforce. I have it max for the rear. And my theory with that is, again, less downforce means that there would be a little bit more movement and stuff. It will be looser in general. Wheel can deal with those little minute movements and things like that. So with me having max downforce, there's just less little movements and things like that. That probably all in all means I'm a little bit slower in the slow speed sections. I will admit to that. Like my first sector, the best I can do is 0.670. I can't actually remember the seconds, but compared to what the leader is doing, it's pretty much a 0.5 even. I think it's like a 0.498 or something like that. And I don't even know if that's necessarily the leader's best. That's just what they ran on their best lap as a whole. My best in total is 0.67. So I will say straightforward that I'm pretty confident that having the high rear downforce does mean it's worse in the lower speed sections. But the middle speed sections, like that turn before the walkway above the track, I don't know the names here. Even if I knew the names, I probably wouldn't be able to pronounce it. But it's a turn before the walkway. And it's about 75 miles an hour, so I'm fairly confident I can take that with as much speed or more than anyone, and it especially helps in the high-speed turns. My best in the final sector, which is just the final turn and on to the front straight, is actually slightly by milliseconds, but still faster than what the leaders are running. And that kind of doubly goes with me too, because the leaders are running manual transmission. Again, with this being a high revving Japanese car, manual transmission matters a whole heck of a heap. My controller just says stick drift, and my practice ain't much, so I just specifically ain't good at it. But for those who are good at it, manual transmission is definitely recommended. I would say there's a genuine argument that between the back straight and the front straight, I'm losing at least a tenth of a second just not running manual. So we'll say because the front straight to the line is maybe a quarter of a tenth because it's half of the front straight to the line, and then maybe the front straight is where I know the front straight is a little bit shorter than the back. So we'll say a quarter of a tenth to the line, and I'm still a little bit faster. So with this downforce the way that is, it may be faster with a wheel to run lower downforce. I will admit that. But it's pretty much assured that it's better in the high speed and about equal, maybe even slightly better in the middle. For the weight, everybody is doing 2 ballast because for some reason PD didn't get an exact weight on there. And 50, which is all the way to the rear, that just means with it in the rear, then it has the rear end lay down more, gets more traction. Kind of again the point of why I like the rear end to be higher, because then it has more room to lay down more and get traction. So there you go, but not all that important really. But this is really cotton picking important, is the transmission. Me running manual, probably 2/10 seconds slower. The initial transmission tune that I had too, in what I uploaded just a clip of, another 2 or so tenths slower, and then improving the suspension matter too. But this transmission really figured out things for me. Because what I frankly thought was going to be better for this high revving car with not much power band was to have the final gear max all the way right. But in reality, it's actually better having all the way left. Because one, there's a bit of wheel spin, and that minimizes wheel spin. And two, as the car leans, it makes it sort of rev up because it's more stress on the car as a whole, and thus the engine too. I think is why it does. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but that would be my guess. So, with the final gear being as low as possible, it's less stress on the transmission in general. Generally speaking, a final gear is more about fuel economy and stuff, but in this, for one, it reduces wheel spin, and then two, it's actually less stress on the car as a whole when accelerating directly out of corners, especially if you're still turning a little bit too, because there's the time it takes for, even after you're done turning, for the car to then stabilize again. So when there's less stress on the car, it can accelerate a little bit faster because it's not over revving, it's not just bouncing off the rev limiter. I'm surprised how well this works with manual transmission, because I think manual transmission they would just find the shift points, but this is what's done with the manual transmission as well. Just the way that those that are using manual have it set for 4 gears. Again, mine is more aggressive because can't really figure out a way to, unless the gears are stretched out so much it doesn't help anymore, where on the automatic it uses first gear. So whatever, this is the best of what I could find with it. So then that's my theory with the transmission. I will admit I'm a little bit lower top speed than what the leaders are running, but also that's one of the advantages of the leaders using less rear downforce is slightly higher top speed. So there's that to be considered. But I think my transmission does perfectly fine through the low end, although again, because it's a little bit tighter, it might be a little bit slower off the turn in low end. So let's say between 10 miles an hour after you start accelerating to maybe 100 miles an hour total or so, I think mine is pretty much equal to what the leaders are running, so that works good enough. And then the other settings, that's everything max and bot and stuff. Brake balance at 5. From what I can tell, brakes lock up the least. When it's like that, I don't have an exact theory on that. That's just how it is. I guess maybe weight distribution or something. I don't really know, but that's just how it ends up being. Generally speaking, I like to run brake bias towards the front anyway, because it makes the car turn in more. So win-win, at least for me on that one. So now I would go to the lap. And again, to me, my tune is better than my lap. I will admit that straightforward. But I'll go ahead and do a tutorial on the lap as well, because as far as I know, I do have the fastest lap of anyone that's doing a tutorial. So I might as well. Not to brag too much, but yeah, I'm happy with the lap. I'll say this. It's probably going to end up being my best finish at Tsukuba, since there was one a long time ago that needed an engine swap, and a lot of people didn't really feel like doing that, because that was before you could just buy the engines. You had to get lucky with that. So anyway, for the lap itself, as always, I do use the actual braking pattern thing. I don't know the exact name of it, but again, with me being legally blind, that's just overall better visual for me than trying to look way out far into stuff. To some degree, I can just count the lines on that. But realistically, once I've done enough it's muscle memory, and I don't really count lines all that much anymore. And I've done over 1,000 miles on this. I think I'm somewhere around 1,050 or so as of recording this video, and I'll probably do more as time goes on. So frankly, it's more muscle memory, where I can say exactly the brake. Here. There's really not a whole heck of a heap to look at there, so I'll just show it in real time. That's the problem with me doing tutorials, is I do a lot different way of braking than most people. I'll admit that one. So, it's there, folks. That's real about all I can say for that. And with the brake balance in 5, it shouldn't really lock up. But one thing that I have noticed is once you get down to here, and maybe going into the hairpin before the final straight, but mainly here, there could be a tiny bit of lockup starting around about here, but it just pretty much means let off the brake a tiny bit, which you're kind of just naturally doing anyway because your braking is ending, like you're to the speed almost to make the turn anyway, so you're kind of just naturally going off the brake anyway, so it sort of works itself out. As you can see, there is a tiny bit of trail braking, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not really that much. It's probably not even 3/4 of a second of dealing with trail braking, so it's not that big a deal, really. Essentially, just 100% for the vast majority, and then maybe the last half to 3/4 of a second. Very slight, like tapping the brakes before completely getting off of it. And again, that might be a little bit different with a wheel and pedal setup. That's where the pedals might make a difference. And then for accelerating off, there is a little bit of modulating the throttle. It can theoretically work to brake later, and then the car will naturally be rotated a little bit farther along into the turn, and then maybe you can get it rotated out where you can just go immediately on the throttle. But at least with my setup, it doesn't end up being any faster. With that, I would say going out enough to where then you can angle your car and then get immediately back on the throttle is probably about half a tenth slower. So I don't necessarily recommend that. Especially not in racing too, because then you're giving a lot of room for someone behind you to try and get their nose in. So win-win situations, just staying more on the apex. And then yeah, stay on the apex, don't touch it doubly, because one, the penalties are really strict here. I'm indifferent to that. I mean, as long as it's consistent, then whatever. And it seems to be no less inconsistent than most Gran Turismo penalty systems, and you can take that one as you may. I don't really feel like getting into the general in this video, but specifically, this car doesn't particularly like the bumps all that much anyway when accelerating out of a corner. So just don't hit it anyway. Get as close as you can without hitting it. And then if you can nail that and accelerate at the right point, your car should just naturally go over to the next apex and then just onward here. Hit the apexes here, use a little bit of dirt, I guess, slightly. Kind of just follow the coloring there. Don't go in the grass, go in the dirt a tiny bit. Just follow the coloring. With this, I've sort of tested it between both the penalty system and how much your car will bounce. Again, it doesn't particularly like the bumps all that much. It does a little bit better here than like accelerating out of a corner, so it can deal with bumps a little bit better like in this particular section. But overall, I still wouldn't recommend going much more than this, because eventually it's going to be a penalty. So again, it's sort of a win-win. It's not going as much, both keeps your car stable and it avoids the penalty. So there you go, that's kind of the marker. Just start braking here, and this one is a little bit more straightforward, because it's just kind of like right on the apex of this little tiny turn. I don't even know if you'd really call that a turn. Pretty much just start braking once you're to the apex. And then you're technically braking in a straight line, but the way that the track is turned, you turn towards the next apex, and that works. In a lot of other higher speed cars, you kind of just go out. Fast forward a little bit. Add a little bit, but in this, it's just not carrying enough speed where that's needed. So you pretty much do just directly brake in a straight line. The braking itself is pretty easy. You're going slow enough to start out with. You don't lock up here. There is kind of multiple strategies, though, for this. Again, the car doesn't particularly like the bumps all that much, but you might be able to get it to work to have the car a little bit more on the rumble strip. I wouldn't really recommend going directly into green, because then there's so much of a variation of balance of the car between what's on the road versus what's completely on the green. It kind of upsets it. But if you're talented enough where you can balance it on that rumble strip there the entire time, it might be a little bit faster in the grand scheme of things because it's less distance traveled. But again, because the car doesn't like the rumble strip getting on to the gas, then you have to exit the rumble strip before you can get onto the gas. And while for getting onto the gas, you're still having quite a lot of the turn left to go. So for even just that little bit that you would even be on the rumble strip anyway before you ever have to get off to get on the gas, if you're really talented enough, it might be slightly faster, but I wouldn't really worry about it that much, because the main importance here is the exit to here, and then again, your car will kind of just naturally carry towards here. And it's doubly important here too, because the car, at least the way that I have it tuned, gets a bit loose here, because you pretty much have to be turning and accelerating at the same time. There's really no getting the car straight to turn here, because it's just the way, the nature of this track is it's the turn kind of, the apex of the turn ends before the turn itself does, so you kind of have to be turning and accelerating. This the car can get sort of kind of loose, and again, rumble strip, probably don't hit that. By the time you're here, it's not that bad, but here, don't be on it. Yeah, that's for sure. But yeah, frankly, with my setup, the car can get a bit loose here. This is one of those that really just is practice throttle control here. This is probably the most important corner, at least for how I have it set up for throttle control. It really is just practice. As you can tell, there was a little bit of modulating the throttle. And frankly, this was the best first sector I ever had. As I said earlier in the video, my best first sector in general, 6.7, this is that. I was able to get my best lap with the best first sector ever. So take that as you may. It's whatever. I mean, I've gotten a 6.8 once and 6.9 3 times, and I can pretty consistently, maybe once every 3 or 4 attempts, get at least a 7.2 or something like that. So it's not a fluke or anything, but whatever. And then for this turn, just very slightly get off the throttle. And then, as you can tell, by the throttle, it's pretty easy to just vary. Very slightly with the throttle. It's not exactly direct, but it's a quick motion. Getting directly off the throttle real quick, the car can get slightly loose, but just very slightly, very little delay for throttle. But the braking is kind of awkward here. Look at the brakes, or lack thereof. Tiny little bits. Little just dabbing the brakes. The exact point in which you dab the brakes ain't really all that important. But with this being brake balance on 5, at least for me, again, without using pedals or anything on a controller, that little just barely dabbing on the brakes makes a pretty big difference, because with the brake balance on 5, it rotates the car. So I think it probably, all in all, it's going to be very slightly faster to just let off the throttle and let it coast. But the problem with that is then you're going to not be able to get back on the throttle as quick, at least with here, I can start modulating the throttle because, again, rumble strips. Don't be full throttle on the rumble strips exiting a corner for all corners. So I can start modulating the throttle pretty early. And again, as I said before, theoretically, it probably is a little bit faster to coast and to turn if you nail it perfectly. But because, again, I have the max rear downforce, at least as eyeballing it compared to what leaders are running, this is the turn I was talking about before, the walkway above the track, I think I'm doing as good, if not better, than the leaders overall. Some other people with this tune, I do believe, can do better than me. Again, I have more faith in the tune than my driving. But, like, specifically this turn, I feel pretty confident about it, really, this particular run. And then gradually get fully on the throttle. Essentially, that really just is muscle memory with that. Just kind of be able to tell by enough practice how quickly the car is rotating towards the other side of the track. You don't want to get on the throttle too early or you're going to end up in the grass. You don't want to get on the throttle too late or you're going to lose time. That really is just practice there. But luckily here it's pretty easy. Just be on the apex, don't get in the grass. One, because just a little bit into the grass is a penalty. Two, because again, as I said, the way the transmission works is it prevents the car from revving up higher. But when it's on the grass, just that stresses out the car more. Thus, the RPM's going to jump and it can bounce off the rev limiter a bit. So again, just kind of doubly both the void penalties and avoid bouncing off the rev limiter, don't get in the grass. But I mean, all in all, that's easy enough. You just follow the white line and it's full throttle. It's pretty, like, the momentum you carry gets you pretty close to the next rumble strips anyway, but like 95% of the time I don't end up hitting them, and usually if I do, it's because I happen to just snip the grass here and it unsettles the car a bit. So it should be fine. For this turn, it's kind of just traditional Tsukuba. It's like is always done with this track and about any car. This turn seems to be pretty universal from like a kart to a Nissan GTR. Is stay on the way outside and then just gradually go kind of sort of to the middle. It doesn't even really have to be perfectly exact because, at least in my opinion, the main importance is there's probably 2 or 3 foot variable here of how far you want to be one way or the other. The main importance is to be able to get on the throttle to get the car rotated to the apex. And again, don't hit the rumble strips. But one thing that this particular tune can do with this car, that while I would still say overall is a little bit slower than what the leaders are doing, both because they can make more precise movements with the wheel and with having less rear downforce, the car is going to rotate a bit better because it's oversteering. The car does have enough grip and stability here where I can sort of rotate it with throttle. A little bit of a dab on the throttle and gradually go up actually rotates the car a bit. Overall, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm slower here. Probably compared to what the leaders are doing, I'll probably like lose a tenth in this particular turn. But again, the turn before I sort of make it up, and the turn after I get to in a bit, kind of make it up there too. This might be the slowest part of the track relative to what the leaders are doing, I will admit that. But the car is pretty stable and consistent here as long as, again, you don't hit the rumble strip that as close to that as possible. And then, just pretty much once you're on the apex, start getting gradually on the throttle, and just once your car is stable enough, again, this is really just practicing too. Once it's stable enough, back fully on the throttle, it'll naturally rotate over to the next rumble strips. These rumble strips are fine to get on full throttle, because while you're still technically turning when the rumble strips start, realistically, just the natural momentum the car is going to carry, if you time it correctly, you're not realistically going to end up on the rumble strips to like here. And then by here, it's so little turning, if maybe none at all, depending if you absolutely nail it and get perfectly on the rumble strips, it's no big deal. But I wouldn't exactly say you gain time getting on the rumble strips either. Because while I wouldn't exactly say it upsets the car, it still ultimately does bounce the car just by default because it's raised compared to the ground. You want just as much full acceleration at this point as possible, so any deterrent from the absolute full amount of acceleration you can get isn't necessarily going to be faster, even though theoretically you wouldn't need as much steering input to do that. It's not any faster, at least for me. I wouldn't say it's outright slower either, it's pretty even, but the farther you go to the rumble strip, the more risk there is then to get in the grass, and that is slower. And just straightforward too is that you want to get it as lined up and even as possible, just on average too. This because that's the general way of how to drive in general. So it just stays kind of with the theme of the car. For this particular turn, with this tune, at least for me, frankly, this last turn is kind of easy. Not to brag or anything, but like the tune I was using in the first clip, I would make this turn within maybe 300th or so. Literally like 1 in every 10 attempts, and even to just get this turn in general is fairly rare too, because the final turn track, a lot of times restarting or whatever, or just purposely not taking the turn in a competitive way, just purposely taking it to carry momentum, because I wouldn't be getting a better lap anyway, so might as well have momentum for the next one type thing. This turn, I would say at least half the time, at least with this tune, this tune to me is just really set up for this final turn. It has full downforce, so it's better in the high speed section. It has just enough loose to it that can some degree be explained by the camber, and to some degree having the rear ride height up too. That just means the rear can move around a little bit and just thus make it a little bit more loose. It has just enough loose where you can get that turn in where it's quickly on the apex, but then it's stable enough too where you can get on the throttle easy. I mean, again, my driving talent, take it as you may, but I feel like I do sort of kind of nail the turn. And what to say, like the specifics for it, I mean, as y'all can see, there ain't really a really breaking point. Just very slightly after the split is basically what I can say for that. For me, it's a muscle memory thing. It's just enough after the split where I feel confident. Yeah, too much and it will go wide. Too little and you're just not going to be carrying as much momentum. It's not the end of the world if it's too little. Too little is better than too wide. But just this is the ample amount to where you can kind of coast in there and then carry more momentum. As well, in terms of braking, not a whole heck of a heap. Pretty full for a tiny bit, and then just little bits of trail brake to be able to get it as perfect as you can. Trail brake is basically just practice. If you can nail it, maybe you can just coast in there like other turns too, but again, trail braking rotates the car too with the brake balance in 5, so whatever. Again, at least for me in particular, this is probably the turn I can do the most consistent of any on the track, so it's not that big a deal. For getting on the throttle, again, not on the rumble strip. Modulate the throttle a little bit to stay on the apex. The throttle can rotate the car some, the brake can rotate the car some. That's one of the good things of probably just this car in general, is just that's kind of the JDM initial D aspect of it, drifty type thing. The throttle and the brake can rotate the car some, so use that to the advantage there. Actually, looking at it just now, I kind of realized, I guess the point to get fully on the throttle is when the rumble strips in. I didn't particularly realize that in real time. But look at it, folks, like right when it ends, full throttle. So literally, right as it starts to narrow, and then end within like a tenth of a second or something, full throttle. And then if you nail it completely, you can stay full throttle the whole time, but do not go more than like maybe 3 or 4 inches on this rumble strip. Again, unsettles the car and you're fully wanting to accelerate at this point. And two, because this is a terrible penalty zone. I don't really understand the penalties on this one. And like every other Tsukuba event ever, you go like quite far onto this. And a lot of the times you could pretty much use the whole thing almost to the grass, but then the tires would be dirty for the next lap. So that was actually a way to cheese if you're definitely on your best lap, is just use all of it to almost as far as you can get to the grass. It's possible, but for here, again, it's got a doubly because one, thermal strips are upset the car, and two, any more than maybe 3 or 4 inches on the rumble strip is a penalty. So there's that too. That doubly works, which is incredibly stupid relative to the rest of the Tsukuba events, whatever it may be, time trial, race, whatever. Here in general, I don't particularly get that one, folks, but it is what it is, and it works fine with this car in general. Realistically, even if it was allowed, you probably wouldn't want to go all that much farther anyway, so whatever. And then there you go, to the line. That's my best lap there, over 57.610. And frankly, with all the best splits I've been able to do with this tune, my best is like a high 57.57. 57.57. So when I can realistically only gain about 400 of a second, I don't see that happening. I've done over 1,000 miles on this. Realistically, I doubt I could do too much more with the particular tune, but maybe just fiddling with stuff I can find very slightly. Little improvements here and there with the tune. Again, overall, I'm more confident with the tune than with my driving. So we'll see on that, but I'd say realistically, I'm like 99% of the way there, both with the tune and the driving, but that 1% of the tune might make a little bit more of a difference in the driving. If I can do at least like a 5.5 or something like that, I might do a clip at the very end, I'll see. But realistically, I'm fairly confident that this is probably going to be the last video for this week's thing, but overall, I'm still overall happy with what I was able to do, because frankly, this is better than my driving is. And to end off the video, in my opinion, this is the beauty of what Gran Turismo should have. Not always be, but should have. It should allow people to tune the cars in the way they want. And for a long time, Gran Turismo was that. There would be one make, time trials, or races in GT5 and 6 fairly often. If anything, it might be the slight majority. But they would have quite a few, I would say at least 40%. Would allow for tuning, but in GT7 and especially GT Sport, there hardly ever is tuning. And in my opinion, once you get it dialed in to exactly the tune that you like my tune is quite a bit different than what the leaders are doing. It's way different. Rear ride height is way different. Aerodynamics, it's a bit different with the camber. It's different of the individual gears of the transmission. Relative to what a lot of people are doing, my tune is quite different. So it really is a set of tune it to what you like mixed with sometimes it will just be run the best tune. That really is the fun of it, is to see what works. Maybe sometimes it'll be your truly own thing. Maybe sometimes it works better just using leader's tune. Depends on the individual circumstances, the individual driver, all that sort of thing. There's no right or wrong answer with it. But in my opinion, the answer should be more people do this event. In my opinion, it's really caught picking fun, because once you get that tune figured out and get it the way that you like it, I truly do think for most people, I'm not going to say everyone, but for most people, they can get closer to the leader's time and the tune that they like the best than what they could in any stock car. Obviously, the ratio would depend on how good they are of a car or whatever it may be. But stock car, over the best time that you can get versus leader in a stock car, versus you in a tuned car versus leader in a tuned car. I think for most people, once they get the tune figured out, they're going to do better with the tune. And that's just a racing thing in general. That's any and all racing, in my opinion. And Gran Turismo, while it might not simulate the exact tuning specifics accurately, it does simulate accurately that tuning matters. And I think the best way to get PD to do more of these tuning type races is do that. If you don't have PlayStation Plus, like me, at least do the qualifying, like time trial type thing for them. Do tutorials, be on forums, do whatever you think is best to get the word out. Because as of now, there's only like 13 or so thousand people that's done this race C. And usually race C gets at least 50,000 people. So that ain't exactly the daintiest look. But for a lot of the people who's done this, they realize how awesome it is. So while there ain't really that many, the people that are willing to try it seem to like it a whole heck of a heap for the most part. Not everyone, I will admit that. And I don't think this should be an every time thing either. There should be some one makes, there should be some bouts of performance, all that. But in my opinion, they should have tuning quite a bit more often. And if that can happen, it'll most certainly be worth yeehaw. And y'all can make it be worth even more of yeehaw by doing it. So, yeehaw!